I'm Mark Edwards, and in a few weeks' time I'll become the new Bishop of Wagga. But I'm presenting a course with Kathryn Kingsley, Sister Kathryn.
Hi, I'm Kathryn. I'm from the Missionaries of God's Love Sisters.
And I want to talk to you about the wisdom to be gained from Charles Taylor's book, A Secular Age. So this monumental book, it's 900 pages if you include the 100 pages of endnotes, is an insight into our world, our culture, as it is today. Pope Francis talked about us not being in an era of change, but being in a change of era. And I think that we're still learning as a church how to be missionaries in this new era. We knew how to be missionaries in the old era, but the new era is something that we're still learning how to do, and perhaps we haven't been that good at it. So what Charles Taylor does is he equips us to be able to be missionaries to the people of our age. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do a series of, perhaps a wave, if you like, maybe a tsunami, of 90-second, 2-minute videos. That's our aim. And each video will take a particular point from Charles Taylor, and there's not any particular logical order to them. It's just a series of videos telling a different point, a different instance of our current era. And at the end, and there'll be some videos which are, if you like, so what videos or so what podcasts, which help us to understand, well, what can we do with that? If that's what our world's like, how can we go forward in that direction? But I just want to make the point that we're really privileged to live in this age. So this era, it's certainly not God-forsaken. I think it's very religious. People are searching for God. It's a very spiritual era. And the Holy Spirit is at work in this era. This is the age that God's given us, and the Holy Spirit is at work here. And what we've got to do is we've got to follow the lead of the Spirit. Charles Taylor is a Spirit-filled person, and he is helping us to follow the lead of the Spirit. So I invite you to enjoy this wave, this series of podcasts of different topics, different points brought up by Charles Taylor.
So one of the real gifts that Charles Taylor gives us is a language for what's happening in the world at the moment and where we are. As missionaries, we can't really evangelize to people from a separate place. And so for us to be able to effectively evangelize, what we want is to be able to understand the sphere where people are so that we can operate from within that sphere. Charles Taylor does a great job of giving us some language to understand the place where we are, or at least where we think we are. So we're not going to try preach from another place, but to talk from within the space that we are. So his book's called A Secular Age, and one of the main things he sets out to do is talk about how this word secular is used a lot, but actually we probably have different ideas of what that means. So he gives us 3 definitions of ways that people might use the word secular, and it's important to understand them. So the first one he calls secular one, and this is your classic, very ancient idea that the world was separated into things that were sacred and things that weren't sacred. So you've got the sacred places, you've got your church, that's a sacred place, and then the other things are what's secular, the temporal things. And so you've got the church is a sacred place, the marketplace is a secular place, and you've got vocations. So the priest, that's a sacred vocation, and then the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, they're your secular vocation. So it's not saying that they're bad or they're anti-religious, it's just saying that they're separated. That they are, one is for the transcendent things and one is for the things here on earth. So sacred was kind of the things ordered towards the transcendent, and secular was the things that were about the world that we're living in. Then he gives us the second idea of what secular means. So some people, when they use the word secular, they're kind of talking about the increase of atheism, the increase of people that are non-believers. So maybe they're atheists, maybe they're agnostics, any category of people that would say, I'm not a believer. So what this is, it's really a decline of belief and a decline of practice. So there's less people in churches, there's more people saying I'm an atheist on the census. It's that kind of thing. And within that sphere, we've got secularism. So secularism is the push to separate church and state. So trying to make sure that the spaces in the world are actually really separate so that a person who isn't a believer doesn't have to engage in any place that has to do with belief. So Taylor then gives us a third idea of what secular can mean. He would say that our secular age at the moment has a distinct characteristic, and that is that belief is not the default. That it's not like there's a category of believers and people have moved away from that, but rather people are starting from a slant of kind of nothingness. Belief is now one option among many. We're existing in what he calls a cross-pressured situation, where the believers are believing by doubting, and the doubters, well, they're tempted by belief because you're in relationship in your family, in your school, in all sorts of situations. If you're a believer, you're in relationship with non-believers. Non-believers, you're in relationship with believers. So there's kind of this, you're aware that there's so many different options of how you could live your life. The important thing about secular 3 is that it can't be undone. It's like once you know that there's another option, you can't undo knowing that. So Taylor would say that the era of naive faith is over. You no longer believe because that's the only option, or that's what you've been taught, or that's what's been passed on to you. Belief now has changed conditions which can't be undone. Taylor would say that there's 5 main characteristics of what this secular 3 looks like. Firstly, he would say that the people in it are living in a world that's kind of lost its enchantment, that suddenly a tree is a tree, it's not part of the enchanted forest, that objects don't hold special powers. And then he would say that the individuals in secular 3 are buffered, which means that they have a protection in their being, that they're not affected by outside forces, that I can choose whether or not what you say to me or what happens in the world gets to me, because meaning is no longer out in the world, but it's within me. It's in my mind. I am the holder of meaning. So rather than people being born into a world with meaning and then trying to interact with that meaning, people are now living in a world where they are the creators of meaning. This means that we've moved from a concept of ourselves as social to ourselves as solo, that all of our elements are now coming from me. I can belong to the country just by being a citizen, whereas before maybe you belonged to the country by being part of your village, and then your village part of the kingdom, or all those kinds of things. Whereas now I have direct access to whatever I want. We'll get to the immanent frame, but one of the elements of that, which is part of this secular 3, is that suddenly, because things aren't enchanted, everything has to be accessible to me, which means that if I want fulfillment and nourishment, that has to be accessible to me in the things I can see and touch and interact with. So my bar for flourishing is lowered. One of the other aspects of this secular 3 is that time is uniform. Everything is now a resource, that all the things that I can see and touch and measure, if I can measure it, it's a resource. And so things don't have a higher purpose. Things have the purpose that I ascribe to them. We start to enter a very kind of economic realm of being. And part of that is that I no longer live in the cosmos. I just live in the universe. That nature just is. It's not ordered by some higher thing. So everyone who is in the world at the moment starts to live in this immanent frame. And probably the key characteristic of what this is that the natural has been separated from the supernatural. Now, if you understand what I mean by those two things, that means you're in the immanent frame. Because if we go back 500 years or something like that, the two were so interconnected that they didn't really need to distinguish them because they were so interrelated. But now we live in a world where we can say, well, that's the natural, that's the supernatural. If you understand those, you're in the immanent frame. One of the key ways to understand this is that creation becomes nature. That just the simple shift of word means that the things that we see and touch aren't necessarily connected to something beyond here. So the immanent frame is kind of like a big building that suddenly everything is in here. Now, there's two ways that people can live in the immanent frame. You can live in a closed, what Charles Taylor would call a closed spin, which is everything that I can see in this building. There's a nice shiny roof up there. I can see the walls. I can measure, interact, and understand with everything that's in here. Or you can take an open spin, which says that I'm living in this space, but I've got a skylight up there. I can see and I believe that there's something beyond here. And in fact, there's ways that I can interact with the things that are beyond what I can see and touch and measure. So you can live in a closed spin, this is all there is, or you can live in an open spin. Actually, there's something outside of here. It's important to note that both of these are actually just spins. Both of them require a big leap of faith to be able to say, I can say that this is all there is, or I can say that there's something beyond here. Both of those require some kind of internal jump. Within the closed spin, we're really talking about something called exclusive humanism. So that means everything can be done by human beings. Everything that there is can be controlled by human beings. It really honors reason as the highest virtue, that if I can figure it out with my mind, it exists. If I can't figure it out with my mind, it doesn't exist. Exclusive humanists will start to get very frustrated if there's something that's not making sense to reason, because it's the belief that everything can be achieved through the human person. The way you can get to exclusive humanism, Taylor would say, is a fourfold process, where you go from total belief to having a God who is insignificant enough that you can reject. That first, you close in the world into an immanent frame, and any kind of higher purpose beyond that can start to be closed in. All I need to do is flourish within this, kind of like the building. Then there's an eclipse of grace. Well, if I can do everything, if everything within here is something that I need to be able to measure or reach or control, then I don't really need anything from outside here. So grace, the movement of God in the here and now, starts to be eclipsed. Like maybe God set everything up, maybe he's going to measure us and judge us at the end for how we did, but we don't need him in the here and now. And if God does come into the here and now, well, I need to be able to measure. I need to be able to understand what it is that God's doing. And so God starts to be measured down to our level of reason. So this sense of mystery of God starts to be eclipsed. And then finally, we start to lose a sense of participation in us participating in the mystery. So the sense of us joining in God's nature, we don't really need. We've suddenly decreased God to a point where he can be rejected.
So Kathryn talked about the immanent frame. I want to make the point that there are different ways to understand the immanent frame, different reactions, if you like, that people have to it. Some people have a closed take on the immanent frame. So a closed take, if you like, is their immanent frame is closed. They're not open to the transcendent. And it's a take in that it's their belief, it's their assumption, it's their take on the world that it's closed. There's those who have an open take on the immanent frame. So they believe that the immanent frame is, we all live in the immanent frame, we have no choice about that, but they believe that they're open to, these particular people are open to transcendent. They believe that God is working in our world. And I think that both the people with an open take and a closed take are people of integrity. Oh no, that's wrong. They're positions of integrity. But at either end beyond that, a little more extreme, you have people who are closed spin and open spin. So closed spin, perhaps if you think of the four New Age atheists, Hawkins, Ditchkins, those sort of people, they take a closed spin on the world. And Taylor, and I think he's right on this, he thinks that that's actually not an intellectually honest position, because their position is a take, but because it's a spin, they present it as the only option, as though you couldn't believe anything else. At the other end, you've got some people who have an open spin. Now, in our world, they're actually far less because of the pressure, if you like, towards the closed take in our world. But you get people, and I'm thinking now this might be like your American evangelists. They'd be, they pretend, they act, maybe they believe that it's the only option. But really, I think you and I, as members of the church, we have an open take on the church, and I think that's an intellectually respectable position. There's people with a closed take on the church, on the world, and I think that's also intellectually respectable. But either of the spin options, I think, probably aren't respectable. Charles Taylor talks about subtraction stories. A subtraction story, on his understanding, is somebody who tells a story about how we got to where we are today, being a world where there's a pressure not to believe, how we got here today. And so the subtraction story is something along the lines of, as we got more and more science, we needed less and less religion, or as we got more and more technology, or as we became more and more urbanised and living in cities, we had less need for religion. So if you like, by subtracting away, by scraping away our ignorance, then on this subtraction story, what was underneath, which is the modern, independent, free, isolated almost human being who doesn't believe in God. And we scrape it away, ta-da, here I am, this is the modern person, and we were always like this, human beings were always like this. That's not how it came to be. It's actually what we are today, our modern, liberal, Western world, and Charles Taylor, by the way, is only about the Western world. Doesn't apply to India, doesn't apply to Indonesia, doesn't apply to Vietnam. This applies to the North Atlantic countries and to Australia and New Zealand, places like that. Our modern self is an achievement. It's a cultural creation, and it's a wonderful, it's a very positive thing as well. But so the subtraction story is wrong. So it's not as though something was subtracted and we got to where we are, but we built something and we became what we are as a cultural achievement. So no subtraction story, but rather to see our liberal, autonomous, Western human being as being something that was built through a process over many centuries. And Charles Taylor goes through that process, and that's one of the really interesting points of the book, but it's not something that we'll have time to look into in great depth in this particular course. Charles Taylor uses the image of a house with a basement, a ground floor, and a first floor as a way to understand the importance of subtraction stories and of a better story, which is what Charles Taylor tries to present in his 900-page opus magnus, A Secular Age. So the subtraction story, well, first of all, the ground floor. We all agree on what's in the ground floor. So the ground floor is the sociological evidence that's here in front of us, that things have changed. So there's different numbers of people going to Mass, a smaller number of people going to Mass in the Western world. There's the autonomy. So all that sort of stuff that is our society, when you look at it, that we agree on. Charles Taylor agrees with the people who do subtraction stories, the Richard Dawkins of this world. They all agree on what's on the ground floor. Where they differ is both in the basement and on the first floor. So the basement, if the ground floor is what we observe, the basement is what causes it. So what's it built on? So the people who are subtraction story people, their basement is very different from the basement of Charles Taylor. So let's go through what the subtraction story people believe in and then do what Charles Taylor believes in. So for the secular subtraction people, their ground floor is, their basement is something along the lines of what's caused this new situation that fewer people go to Mass, that we're not passing on our faith very well, that there's people going off in different directions. They think that what causes that is, depending on the particular subtraction story, maybe urbanisation, that as people has come to the city, that they haven't necessarily believed in religion as much, or they believe perhaps with the increase of science. So that's their cause, and then the result is what's on the ground floor. And then the first floor is their prediction, the future. So as we go up, it's the prediction for what's happening in the future. Their prediction of the future is that our world will continue to get more and more secular, that fewer people will come to church, that and I presume that because different people would have slightly different stories, but I presume that for them that they would think that in the end there'd be a world where perhaps you might have only a very small number of people who believe in God. They wouldn't be totally wiped out because you'd always got fringe dwellers, people who are a bit strange, and so that, but just that number of people would be, that proportion of people would be the number of people who believe. It's very different on Charles Taylor's take, because he tells he's got different causes and therefore he'll have a different future. So for Charles Taylor, he talks about new structures in society and new structures in our way of belief changing the way that we behave. And so on his call, religion hasn't disappeared, but it's been pushed maybe out into different places. So Charles Taylor then, because he thinks that we've got new ways of believing, new ways of behaving, that's the ground floor, and it's changing how we do this. He then, is, for his first floor, the future, he's got a wide range of possibilities. It could be because we get to make some decisions and we get to follow certain paths. It could be that religion springs up in different ways. It could be that we find new ways to believe, and so that religion might flourish in the traditional way again, or at least in the traditional churches, even not in the traditional way. Or it could be that religion does become much less obvious. But certainly Taylor thinks that religion isn't going anywhere, it isn't going away. And if you think that religion is disappearing, you're just looking in the wrong places. So he points out that on the ground floor, less people might be going to church, but there's lots and lots of people who count themselves as being spiritual and maybe who have crystals. And we're still a very spiritual society. We're just not as church-going or religious in a traditional Christian way as we used to be. Interestingly, so one of the things that Charles Taylor does in his book is he points at a lot of different facts. So while Charles Taylor agrees with, say, Richard Dawkins is going from quite a high proportion of people who believe and a high proportion of people who practice, maybe 80 or 90% believe and maybe 50 or 60% practice, down to where we are today, where perhaps 60% believe in a traditional Christian way, and maybe somewhere between 10 and 20% practice. And he's predicting that'll keep going down. Charles Taylor points out that, in fact, religion and spirituality is popping up in new areas, but also he points out that religion isn't just on the way down, it's also been on the way up. So, for example, in 1790, thereabouts, just before the French Revolution, 1750, 1790, perhaps practice in the church and belief was lower than it is today. America, for example, was a land of prostitutes and robbers, and it was a very secular country at that stage. And America has become much, much more secular. And then it's died away also a little bit, although it's remained an exception compared to the other North Atlantic countries. But certainly religion hasn't disappeared in America. But also it's not just down, down, down. It's up and down and up and down. And so it well could be, Taylor points out, depending on the decisions we make, you and I make, the ministry that we provide, it well could be that the future is on the up as well. The next topic I'd like to talk about is the buffered self. So I want to talk a little bit about the change that's happened between, say, 1500 and today. In 1500, people lived in what we might call an enchanted world. So where the material and what we'd call the immanent and the transcendent were mixed together. So the enchanted world, that's Charles Taylor's word for it. It's a place where people were very porous, like they were very open to, they understood that they could be affected by the spirits, and so they were very cautious and concerned about what spirits they might upset, and in fact that also, of course, made them want to have a strong relationship with a caring and loving Father and a saving Jesus. Today, we've got not a enchanted world, but a world where the spiritual, the transcendent, has been separated away from the immanent. So we can, even the fact that we talk about transcendent and immanent, and that makes sense to us, means that we are people of this age. And then, of course, some people have subtracted away the transcendent and they've only got the immanent. But in this era, also we're buffered selves. We've got if you like, a protection, a buffering, and we're not as afraid of being impacted by spirits. So we're able to be much more cavalier about the spiritual world because we feel very protected from it. So the change is from an enchanted world to a world which is immanent and transcendent, and the change in the people who live in that world, you and I, who understand the world, is from porous people who are easily affected by the spirits, to buffered selves. I want to say something about how this journey was made. Now, there's lots of dots on the journey, and I'm just picking one of them. Deism, providential deism, a God who looks after us but who's a bit remote from us, was actually a step made by believing Christians as a way of defending God. So deism is where you think of God as being, having created the world, but then having living it alone. So think of perhaps a watchmaker who winds up the watch, and he's made a beautiful watch. He winds it up, and then he steps back and he watches it, and the watch runs by itself, and the watchmaker's not involved on a day-to-day process. So this providential deism, this world which is running by itself, initially Christians believed that God was looking benignly on them, but we're living in a world where things are just following the rules of nature. This is part of the 17th and 18th century, just following the rules of nature. Of course, this good God, if you like, he enabled things to happen. So in a way, the protection of God from a distance helped us to move from being an enchanted self to being a buffered self. But after a while, after some decades, centuries perhaps even, of thinking of providential deism, then all of a sudden you just go, well, why do I need the watchmaker? The watch is working perfectly fine on its own. And somehow God gets distant and distant. But even for us Christians, even if people hadn't chopped off the providential God, it's not the world as we know it. God wants a relationship with us. But you're going to find that lots of your young people, that's their God. So you need to be looking for people who've got a distant God rather than a relationship with God. And if it's not the people in your youth group, it'll be their friends. And so you need to be helping them to understand where their friends are coming from also. And it's taken another step again today, a morally therapeutic providential God. So in this, perhaps it's more now like you'll find where people think that the God helps them to be good, and God wants us to be good, and if we're good, God will reward us with an afterlife. But while we're on earth, we're really independent. We really exist separately from him. And like I said, that's not really a Christian God, but it's the God that we'll find that some of our young people who say that they believe are attached to. And our task will be to help them form an intimate personal relationship with the God who loves them and wants to share their life with them, to help them go from where they are to being friends of God, and then to take another step to being engaged to God, and then perhaps to be God's spouses. We all experience cross pressures, all of us in the Western world. So cross pressure comes from being pushed in two different directions. So one way, on our immanent frame, there's the pressure, the cultural pressure towards the closed take, and maybe even towards the closed spin. It seems to be what everybody's believing, like it's the way that the world's going. And so there's this pressure in this direction that we feel, and perhaps you can feel that yourself. It's not just something that's out there. I'm not thinking maybe everybody feels every bit of this as strongly as somebody else, but I suspect that all of us who were born in this culture feel that pressure towards that end. But there's also another pressure which goes in a different direction, and even the people who are at the closed, maybe not at the closed spin end, but certainly at the closed take end, they feel a pressure in the other way, which is something like, is that all there is? Is there nothing more to life than having a family, having a job, bringing up children, and then dying? Is that it? Isn't there something more? Isn't there something deeper? And they pine for that depth, just as you and I do as well. What does it feel to be suffocated by immanence? And there's three particular things that people who ask, is that all there is, that they feel. And the first one is, it's around a fragility of meaning. So their life, their understanding of their life and their role in the world doesn't have much depth. It's able to be broken easily. And so they're a bit worried. Worried's probably not the right word, but they're particularly death asks the question, what's the meaning? And that pushes them to ask, is that all there is? The second thing I want to say is that there's crucial moments in our lives. I'm thinking of births, weddings, deaths, which traditionally in a Christian society we've made important, we've solemnized by associating them with the transcendent, like with baptism, with marriage, with death rituals. But if you take that away, how do you make my marriage important? How do I make the birth of my child important? How do I make the death of somebody who's died important? So if you like, there's a flatness to our whole lives. And certainly there's a flatness to those crucial moments in our lives. They're taken away. And the third point is that there's a felt flatness even to the everyday, like the ordinary just becomes really monotonous and nothing to differentiate it. So those three things, the ordinary being monotonous and normal all the time, just nothing special about it, not being able to have special moments, which are, if you like, higher moments, and also the third thing of the fragility of our meaning. Those three things drive us to say, is that all there is? That's what constitutes that cross pressure. So there's a cross pressure, and that cross pressure drives us into believing lots and lots of different possibilities. I want to talk about mutual fragilization. So the fact that I live beside perhaps a Muslim family on one side and a Jewish family on another, and across the road from a family which is atheist, means that my faith becomes more fragile. So 500 years ago, where we lived in a little village where there were only Catholics of various degrees of strength, most of whom quite strong, I didn't have all these possibilities, all these options. I just, it was, and I was quite strong. I was strengthened by all the people around me. Now that I've got these other people beside me, I suppose we'd always known that there were Muslims, and we'd always known that that there were Protestants, but they were other. They lived in another country. They were different types of people. But now these are people who are really relevantly similar to me. They're just like me. And if they believe it, well, I could believe it because they're very similar to me. So my faith is fragilized by living with these sorts of people. But also their faith is fragilized by living with me. So the atheist neighbour over the road, he goes, oh, that person's just like me, but they believe in God, and it makes them more fragile in their atheism. So our world has a fragilization of belief that has never existed before, partly because of how we're mixed, because of globalization of faith, if you like, that we're all mixing together. So you are fragilized, the people in your youth group are fragilized in their faith, but also their atheist friends are fragilized as well. And that's it's an opportunity, as well as it's an opportunity to recommit, but it's also an opportunity to be evangelists. So I think that today we experience our faith in a different way. So our ancestors 500 years ago, when they were only surrounded by people who believed, maybe they believed by believing. But you and I, and the people in our youth groups, we believe by doubting. We're all Thomas now. Charles Taylor wants to call our era the age of authenticity. Maybe another way, another expression for it would be the age of expressive individualism. So in our era, each of us has to find her or his own way to be ourselves. We have to discover who we are. We have to perhaps make who we are, and then we have to live out of that particular experience. And you'll find this in a whole lot of phrases in our world, like "be true to yourself." My religion is a personal thing. All of these sort of things indicate that we're on a journey to discovering who we are at our very heart, and then living out of that. So be free, be true to yourself, be you, be forever proud. Those are sort of things which show our expressive individualism. So we have to find out who we are, and we have to express that individual. So this authenticity we have, it's not just something that's in our world, it's actually an ethic. It's a duty. We're not allowed to do something because an authority or a wisdom or a power tells us that we should do it. We can only do things because they're true to ourselves. Certainly in the long run in life, maybe for short periods of time, or because we have to do it for work, we have to put up with things for a little while, but we can't do that with our lives because we have to be ourselves. So this authenticity that we live is an ethic, and that's certainly something which is new to our world. I'm also got this, is that all there is? That's really flat, that's really boring. Isn't there something more? So I'm reaching, and out of all of that, with the mutual fragilization and the needing to be authentic, so I look into myself, I see what I believe, and I live out of that. So there's a nova of possibilities. And you'll be noticing that in your friends and in a lot of young people that you deal with. The supernova means that the place we're in at the moment is not a stable state. So what satisfied one person won't satisfy the next. What satisfies one generation won't satisfy the next. So there's going to be this sort of evolving, and it puts a lot of strain on believing communities. So somehow your youth group and you and our church has to be big enough to have still a very stable core, but also to be welcoming and to accompany these people because they're on a journey. Because of the supernova, expecting it, and because of the ethic of authenticity, expecting everybody to fit into a particular conformity of Christianity is probably going to be very, very difficult. If you do that, you'll drive people away. We have to be faithful. They have to be disciples, but there's got to be an allowance for them on that journey to be welcomed where they are. So KK is going to talk about spirituality in the age of authenticity, but I just want to make the point to deal with the Nova that there are probably as many spiritual paths as there are seekers. And so there's going to be a lot of different positions in our parish, in our youth group, in our diocese.
So in the immanent frame, there's a search for fullness. But if you take out the search for transcendence within that, then you're left trying to find significance without transcendence. And so this can be kind of put into the category of all the things that we would call human flourishing. So human flourishing is trying to find significance for the human life without the possibility of transcendence, transcending what we have now into something more. We don't have any goals or obligations beyond the immanent frame, beyond what we can see and touch and interact with, beyond what can be achieved in our life that we have before death. And so it's not enough for us to stop believing in the gods. We need to find significance here and now. And so one of the ways that this has been done is through kind of this creation of what's called the modern moral order. And that really works on the basis of mutual benefit of I can give if I'm going to receive. That things kind of need to equal out in the here and now. Things within my lifetime, everything kind of needs to balance out. It's going to be, so I still have a moral code. My morality is to the world, to society. I'm going to leave the world a little bit better than what I found it. But I'm going to enjoy myself along the way. So it becomes ridiculous to think of total self-sacrifice or things like that. Just don't make sense. But I still have my moral code. I still have things that I'm obligated to. I've decided to obligate myself to, because let's get real, sometimes the demands of belief in God or transcendence, they're unachievable. So what we want to do is create a goal that's achievable. And doing stuff to help other people that's also going to help me, that's achievable. So I'm going to pursue that instead of something bigger. So we get rid of eternity, but we keep a moral project. Flourishing looks like contribution to the common good, fulfillment in my person, and happiness, that I'm enjoying myself. I'm trying to do all of that before death. Whereas transcendence would be about, obviously, we want those things too, but at times there might be a call for sacrifice of ourselves that doesn't see those met in the here and now. The important thing to note is that it's not like the religious are after transcendent and the non-religious are after exclusive humanism, human flourishing. Actually, these can both exist in the religious. That maybe there's people living their religion as though they need to achieve everything in the here and now. Everything needs to be resolved and leveled out. There needs to be total justice before death because we're in this place. We're operating out of this place. And so it's not an us versus them situation. We're just trying to understand the different ways that people might be living their lives. So what does spirituality look like in this age of authenticity? I think one of the key things we can say is that it's not about having fixed positions. It's not like I totally believe this or I totally don't believe that. We've got an increase of people in the intermediate positions that things are not so much a spectrum as all over the place. Tradition is no longer the starting point. As I was saying before, we've moved from the social to the solo, which means that spirituality is now about me. Religion, well, that could have been something that we did together. But even now, if I affiliate with a religion, I'm doing it because I affiliate. It's not because my family or my culture says to affiliate. It's about my personal quest. So spirituality today is full of spiritual seekers on individual quests. We see this in the way that people pilgrimage to Taizé, or the way that people engage with World Youth Day. It's all about my journey. It's not just something I choose to do, so much as something that I feel I have to do to be authentic. In this age of authenticity, I have to do what's authentic for me. Spirituality in this age, it's subjective, it's self-focused, it's feeling-focused, and it's about autonomous exploration. It can't just be about what's in my mind or what I adhere to in terms of thought. It has to engage my feelings. I have to feel it. It has to resonate with me. These individual seekers in the modern context of authenticity don't just want to believe something, attend something, interact with something through some kind of mediary. It's all about wanting the direct contact. I want a personal experience. I want a personal encounter because I want to be able to say that I know why I believe this. So one of the other elements of our current context is it's not just like you have people who believe in something beyond here. Let's call them the transcendents, and the exclusive humanists, those who say this is all there is. Taylor would say we've actually got a third corner in the contest, which he calls the neo-Nietzscheanisms, or the immanent counter-enlightenment. So these are the people who say, actually, this is all there is, and none of it means anything. I'm going to give up wanting anything to mean anything, and he calls this the will to power. So are we stuck in this immanent frame, or is there a way to be converted to something beyond? So Taylor talks about these as conversions. He gives us a model of some of the different itineraries we can take, some of the different paths that we can journey to explore what's beyond here. And to do this, he gives us 4 kind of key characters that have taken different paths and found something outside of the immanent. They've broken out through different paths. So the first one he would introduce to us would be St. Francis of Assisi, and he would title his journey Religious Experience. That Francis, who's kind of stuck in the immanent frame, all the world as it is, suddenly religious experience, something outside breaks in. Not from any of his own personal power, but the love of God breaks in from outside and opens him up. He has this experience with something outside, and then when he returns to the world, he has a paradigm shift. Suddenly everything in the world has altered meaning. That nature is returned to creation. He starts to engage with creation in this beautiful way that's because of the encounter of religious experience that he's had. Another character that Charles Taylor introduces to us is a man by the name of Gerard Manley Hopkins. And the route that he takes is one through language, specifically poetics. Hopkins uses language in such a way that it doesn't just describe what he sees, it starts to generate something. It's world-making. He uses language and poetry in such a way that it resonates with what's within, and it starts to give us a feeling of the unseen through language. Language starts to hold the tension between what's seen and what's unseen, the visible and the invisible. It starts to bridge the gap through that resonance. If you can't feel it, then Taylor says, I can't explain it to you anymore. You either feel it or you don't. And sometimes language does fall dead, but language can also be a very powerful tool to help us feel and engage with the things that are unseen. This is something of what we would call the new poetics, the language that makes the unseen felt. Another character that Charles Taylor introduces us to is a man by the name of Ivan Illich. So he was a Catholic priest. He was kind of living in the institution. And he started to see that this thing that started with love had been brought down to a bunch of rules. Everything had been codified, that you weren't even interacting. And one of the ways that Illich does this is through the story of the Good Samaritan. He looks at the 3 characters and he says, well, it wasn't rules that brought the Good Samaritan to engage with the man at the side of the road. He wasn't caught in what he should be doing. He acted out of his own person. He acted out of love. And so the thing that really saved him was encounter, personal relationship. And so Illich starts to see that the way that we can break out of the here and now is through relationships, through a network of relationships, that it's not codes and rules that are going to save us, but our salvation is in what he calls a network of agape. And finally, a character that Charles Taylor introduces us to is Charles Pegway. Now, Pegway was a French peasant artisan kind of character. So he's not from the elite, but Pegway would say something like, it's not history that's going to save us, because that's just like running alongside the past. We want to take the past and use it in such a way that it's going to be fruitful and life-giving and active now. We don't just want to mechanically reproduce the past. We want to creatively continue it. He started to fall out through the ritual aspect of his faith was kind of like just reproducing that something that had happened in the past. What really helped him out of this place was the image of chains, of links. Essentially what we call the communion of saints. That through being linked to one person who's linked to another person, the tradition is carried on, but in a creative way. Each one being held to the one before, but living it out in their own personal way moving forward. That suddenly we have a sense of hope because we have a sense of connection. We're not floating out on our own, but we're also free to move forward with the future. He's trying to help us find a way that we don't avoid the past, we don't do the past, but we use the past. So we apply the past creatively through what he calls a gathering of time, that all these little moments that have happened through history, through the lives of the saints, that I can gather them all up and then use them with my life in a creative way moving forward. So these are just some ways that people through time have been able to find a way out of the immanent frame, that we're still living within it, but kind of saved from the total depression that can come when you're in that space. These are stories of conversion, gifts of hope.
So I want to talk about our current society at the moment, and in terms of its ethics. So Charles Taylor calls it the modern moral order, and he makes the point that it, if you like, it mimics Christianity. A lot of the things which are deep values for Christianity are deep values also for our society. So in a way, our modern secular society is it's a child of Christianity, but it wants the kingdom without the king, and which is an echo again of that deism, having the kingdom without the king. So I want to talk a little bit about the ethics of our current world, and because I think that these are good things, and they need to be we need to put them for ourselves into a relationship around Jesus Christ, and we'd like other people to do that as well. But certainly it's not, the goals of this society are not anathema to us. So what are the goals of this current society? First of all, because it's got a closed take, the highest ideal it can offer is not transformation. It can't see any point in suffering, even if that suffering is because I'm being transformed to being closer to God. St. Francis of Assisi, Mother Teresa, these people make Teresa of the Little Flower, somebody who goes into a enclosed convent. These things make no sense to our current world. The highest they can offer is flourishing, human flourishing. So you'll see people talk about what they want for their children. I want my child to be happy. I think in another era they would have said, I want my child to be hardworking, to be diligent, to be polite, to be, a contributor to society. And I think the people still want that too. But we've raised the flourishing above those transformative effects, perhaps. The 4 goals that our society has, it wants more organic ties, more organic connections. And so that's going to be connections within myself, so that my sexuality and my body and my spirit are all closer together. A great goal. So more organic ties. Also, it's going to want more organic ties between people. So we're going to want, in that sense, we're going to want equality. So there's equality in the world is a really big thing. So I think particularly expressed in our Western society, equality for women, equality for people of different sexual attractions. These drives for equality. That's a second thing. There's a desire for the fullness of sensuality. So it had been the case, I think, that in our Western society, it's not a Christian thing, but in our Western society, we'd promoted the mind, and like it was like we had to discipline our body, and so we had to be about our decisions, not about living out the fullness of the joy. There's also a desire to live lives devoted to things of intrinsic value. Like I want my job to be a meaningful job that makes a really important difference in the world. So live things of an intrinsic value, have equality in the world, not be only disciplined, but also live out our sensuality, have an integration in our bodies, and also have more organic unity in our lives, bring everything together. Those are probably the 4 goals, I think, of our society. So we come now to, if you like, the second phase of our series of videos that Sister KK and I are doing. We've done a lot of stuff which explains what our world looks like, and I hope that you can look at that world and you can love it. It's very exciting. It's the world that God's given us. So it's the world that Spirit's active in. But understanding our world's one thing. So what? What are we going to do with that? How do we make any difference? So what Sister KK and I would like to do with these last few videos is give you suggestions from Charles Taylor for where there are openings in our world for us, where our world perhaps would be very willing to hear something of Jesus Christ and look for a relationship with him. So I want to talk about this in the context of an expression of an itinerary, perhaps new itineraries. So an itinerary is a journey plan, and there were old itineraries where there were old ways to become Christians, there are old ways to become Catholic, but in this new era, we need new itineraries. People don't travel the old roads anymore. So we need to explore what are the new roads that people are already taking to become Catholic, to become Christian, to become spiritual. And then those roads, we can look at them and say, maybe some of those roads or maybe some of those general directions will be paths that other people will be interested in, some of the seekers in our era.
So whether or not we've got an open or a closed spin of the immanent frame, Taylor would say that there's a malaise, a dis-ease, a discomfort, a growing sadness about what it is to be here. He really wants us to get in touch with how it feels to be in the place that we are. And you kind of know it. It resonates somewhere inside when you start to think, is this all there is? Surely there's something more. There's a quote by someone who says, I don't believe in God, but I miss him. That sense that, something in me is not entirely satisfied that this social construct that we have, the immanent frame, is all that there is. As we've started to flatten our world through disenchantment, as we've started to decrease our goals for human flourishing so that they fit in this nice, controllable, measurable, here and now kind of sphere, we start to get sad at the weight of what we've lost. Our actions, our achievements, our goals start to feel like they're not significant enough. And this creates an inverse pressure, kind of like a vacuum of pressure. As there's less weight to our goals, our achievements, our actions, there's an inverse pressure, kind of like a vacuum, that the weight of the nothingness starts to press in on us and we feel it. And so what we try to do is we get scared that we're going to implode. So we start to try find things in the immanent frame to puff up with significance. So suddenly we'll puff up the body, or we'll puff up art and beauty, or we'll puff up the meaning of our connection with things, And so we start to apply meaning to things within the world to try and puff them up, to avoid ourselves feeling the weight of the nothingness. We feel it, we know it. And so there's more and more searching within the immanent frame for different ways to kind of bring significance to this life. And the more choices that we have, the more ways that people have found to try and add significance to their existence, the more choices we have. And science shows us that the more choices we have, the less happy we are, because we're scared that we're not living the thing that's going to make us happiest.
I think one of the ways in which our world expresses that it's just not comfortable where it is at the moment, one of the two cross pressures, is through the need to gather time. So, we can, if we live our lives spread out, like there's my birth, there's my teenage years, there's my middle age, there's my old age, there's my death, and it's just spread. It's just all in bits and pieces. How can I need to gather it together so I can look at the meaning of it. And one of the ways that we gather time is by doing it in cycles. So we have, every year we celebrate a birthday. Every year we celebrate Christmas. Like, if you like, we gather the new year, the 1st of January, what happened in the last year, as well as making commitments for what's going to happen. So we gather the year together, or we gather the years together. And death is one of the things that force us to want to gather time. And in particular, I'm thinking not of my own death, because when I'm dead, I'm dead. That doesn't matter anymore. It's the death of others, death of people I love. When my parents die, when, oh, please God, it doesn't happen to any of us, our children die, we just go, well, what did that person mean to me? What did that person mean? And that's where we need to gather time together. It's a different sort of time, if you like, rather than the time just of our secular era.
So moving forward, what does this all mean for us as missionaries? I think some of the things that we can take is that we want to get the idea that maybe things aren't as black as white as what we thought they were. That we can start to get an understanding that there's many different ways of looking at the world, and we don't have to come against each other, but we can come alongside each other, try and understand where the other person is, how they're viewing the world, how they're viewing what's important for human life. There's no point trying to preach transcendence to someone who it doesn't even kind of fit their realm of understanding. I think one of the other things is that for someone living in the realm of exclusive humanism, trying to make human flourishing, get the most out of this world and this life that they can, it's going to be really hard to kind of offer them the life of Jesus, which is in some ways about self-sacrifice and putting yourself in a situation where maybe everything's not going to level out in this lifetime. So I think what we have to do is talk about the reason why. The reason that we do that is because the goal is that good. I think that we have to talk more about heaven, more about deification and what it is that we're called to, that freedom from sin, that fullness of life that we're called to. It can't just be about what's faith going to do for me here and now. If we don't talk about eternity, then it just becomes another option of how to live your life now. I think the thing that we have to offer in faith is eternity, is transcendence, is a life beyond here, is a fuller flourishing than can ever be achieved here. But we can only do that by opening people up to the idea that there's something that much better, something that's that good, that it's worth self-sacrifice. I think one of the other things it can help us with as missionaries is just to have compassion, to sit alongside people and understand that maybe they're not coming from a basis of faith. Maybe they're not coming from the same starting point as you. But that doesn't mean that we can't join each other in the journey. If we have a whole bunch of individual seekers on personal quests, then what we really need to do is what Pope Francis has been talking about, accompaniment. We need to accept that people are on a journey and that that's actually okay. We don't need to be scared by the journey. What we need to do is get alongside people and accompany them on the journey. The end point isn't necessarily trying to get people to adhere to the code, to have the right practice of their belief. The end point is really Jesus. And we have to be okay with that being a journey for people. Accept that we're in this place of searching for authenticity. We need to find ways to express and communicate the gifts of what we have to offer, that it's not just about eternity and it's not just about now. What we have is the whole package. And so I think we need to get better at articulating what it is that life in Christ is really about.
I think being a Christian today is really exciting. Jesus was asked by the people in his village, like, where did this man get all this power, this wisdom? And we know where he got it. He got it from the Holy Spirit. And in our better moments, we live that ourselves. And it's really exciting to live that life of trust, that life of vulnerability, throwing ourselves again and again on God and trusting him again and again, and having him catch us again and again, and to introduce other people to that life is really wonderful. To be able to share with them the adventure that we're on, and in that way invite them to join the adventure, to become seekers, to become pilgrims, to not just have also a momentary wow experience, but to find a way to stay in that experience and to live it out. I suppose that's the difference between being a seeker only and being a seeker and a dweller. And we have the wonderful opportunity to share the experience we've had and to help others to not only experience it, but to come to live in it, to become dwellers as well as seekers. Go get them.